Hallo und herzlich willkommen. If you're here, you're probably curious about learning German without feeling like you're cramming for a test, right? Well, you're in the right place. In this video, we'll learn some super practical German words you'll actually use when you're out and about, ordering food, or trying to look like you've been speaking German for years, even though you just started. I'll say each word clearly, you'll repeat after me, and by the end of it, you'll feel a little more confident. And hey, maybe even a bit more German than you were 20 minutes ago. Oh, and by the way, if you ever think, hey, I wish learning German felt more like a game and less like reading IKEA instructions, check out this app called Airlearn. I've been using it and my vocabulary has leveled up faster than my caffeine tolerance. All right, let's get started, shall we? Ich. Once again. Ich. This means I. Use it in Ich bin müde, which means I am tired. Pronounce it as ich. Soft. Ch, like in Bach. Heißen. Once again. Heißen. This means to be called. Use it in Ich heiße Maria, which means my name is Maria. Pronounce it as heißen. Kommen. Once again. Kommen. This means to come. Use it in Ich komme aus Italien, which means I come from Italy. Pronounce it as kommen. Aus. Once again. Aus. This means from. Use it in aus Deutschland, which means from Germany. Pronounce it as aus. Wohnen. Once again. Wohnen. This means to live. Reside. Use it in Ich wohne in Hamburg, which means I live in Hamburg. Pronounce it as wohnen. Und. Once again. Und. This means and. Use it in Anna and Paul, which means Anna and Paul. Pronounce it as und. Auch. Once again. Auch. This means also. Use it in Ich komme auch aus Berlin, which means I also come from Berlin. Pronounce it as auch. In. Once again. In. This means in. Use it in Ich wohne in Wien, which means I live in Vienna. Pronounce it as in. Sprechen. Once again. Sprechen. This means to speak. Use it in Ich spreche Deutsch, which means I speak German. Pronounce it as sprechen. Bin. Once again. Bin. This means am, first person of to be. Use it in Ich bin Lehrer, which means I am a teacher. Pronounce it as bin. Hello. Once again. Hello. This means hello. Use it in any informal greeting. Pronounce it as hallo. Guten Morgen. Once again. Guten Morgen. This means good morning. Use it in the morning hours. Pronounce it as Guten Morgen. Restaurant. Once again. Restaurant. This means restaurant. Use it in Wir gehen ins Restaurant, which means we are going to the restaurant. Pronounce it as Restaurant. Speisekarte. Once again. Speisekarte.de. This means menu. Use it in Die Speisekarte bitte, which means the menu, please. Pronounce it as Speisekarte. Tisch. Once again. Tisch. This means table. Use it in Der Tisch ist frei, which means the table is free. Pronounce it as Tisch. Bestellen. Once again. Bestellen. This means to order. Use it in Ich möchte bestellen, which means I'd like to order. Pronounce it as bestellen. Essen. Once again. Essen. This means food or to eat. Use it in Das Essen ist lecker, which means the food is delicious. Pronounce it as essen. Trinken. Once again. Trinken. This means to drink. Use it in Ich möchte etwas trinken, which means I'd like something to drink. Pronounce it as trinken. Getränk. Once again. Getränk. This means drink or beverage. Use it in Ein kaltes Getränk bitte, which means a cold drink, please. Pronounce it as Getränk. Rechnung. Once again. Rechnung. This means bill. Use it in Die Rechnung bitte, which means the bill, please. Pronounce it as Rechnung. Zahlen. Once again. Zahlen. This means to pay. Use it in Ich möchte zahlen, which means I'd like to pay. Pronounce it as zahlen. Kellner, Kellnerin, once again. Kellner for male, or Kellnerin for female. This means waiter or waitress. Use it in Der Kellner bringt die Rechnung, which means the waiter brings the bill. Pronounce it as Kellner, Kellnerin. Guten Appetit. Once again, Guten Appetit. This means enjoy your meal. Say it before someone starts eating. Pronounce it as Guten Appetit. Supermarkt. Once again, Supermarkt. This means supermarket. Use it in Ich gehe zum Supermarkt, which means I'm going to the supermarket. Pronounce it as Supermarkt. Einkaufen. Once again, einkaufen. This means to shop. Use it in Gehe einkaufen, which means I'm going shopping. Pronounce it as einkaufen. Preise. Once again, Preis. This means prices. Use it in Die Preise sind hoch, which means the prices are high. Pronounce it as Preise. Regal. Once again, Regal. This means shelf. Use it in Die Milch steht im Regal, which means the milk is on the shelf. Pronounce it as Regal. Waren. Once again, Waren. This means goods or products. Use it in Die Waren sind frisch, which means the products are fresh. Pronounce it as Waren. Kasse. Once again, Kasse. This means cash register or checkout. Use it in Ich bezahle an der Kasse, which means I pay at the register. Pronounce it as Kasse. Bezahlen. Once again, bezahlen. This means to pay. Use it in Ich möchte bezahlen, which means I want to pay. Pronounce it as bezahlen. Einkaufstasche. Once again, Einkaufstasche. This means shopping bag. Use it in Haben Sie eine Einkaufstasche? Which means do you have a shopping bag? Pronounce it as Einkaufstasche. Frisch. Once again, frisch. This means fresh. Use it in Das Brot ist frisch, which means the bread is fresh. Pronounce it as frisch. Gemüse. Once again, Gemüse. This means vegetables. Use it in Ich kaufe Gemüse, which means I'm buying vegetables. Pronounce it as Gemüse. Obst. Once again, Obst. This means fruit. Use it in Obst ist gesund, which means fruit is healthy. Pronounce it as Obst. Fleisch. Once again, Fleisch. This means meat. Use it in Ich esse kein Fleisch, which means I don't eat meat. Pronounce it as Fleisch. Brot. Once again, Brot. This means bread. Use it in Ich nehme ein Brot, which means I'll take a bread. Pronounce it as Brot. Milch. Once again, Milch. This means milk. Use it in Ich trinke Milch, which means I drink milk. Pronounce it as Milch. Soft Cheese. Käse. Once again, Käse. This means cheese. Use it in Der Käse ist lecker, which means the cheese is tasty. Pronounce it as Käse. Getränke. Once again, Getränke. This means drinks. Use it in Die Getränke sind im Kühlschrank, which means the drinks are in the fridge. Pronounce it as Getränke. Rabatt. Once again, Rabatt. This means discount. Use it in Gibt es einen Rabatt? Which means is there a discount? Pronounce it as Rabatt. Kunde, Kundin. Once again, Kunde for male or Kundin for female. This means customer. Use it in Der Kunde wartet, which means the customer is waiting. Pronounce it as Kunde, Kundin. Zu bezahlen. Once again, zu bezahlen. This means to pay. Amount due. Use it in Das macht 10 Euro zu bezahlen, which means that's 10 euros to pay. Pronounce it as zu bezahlen. Schule. Once again, Schule. This means school. Use it in Die Schule beginnt 8, which means school starts at 8. Pronounce it as Schule. Lehrer, Lehrerin. Once again, Lehrer for male or Lehrerin for female. This means teacher. Use it in Mein Lehrer ist nett, which means my teacher is nice. Pronounce it as Lehrer, Lehrerin. Schüler, Schülerin. Once again, Schüler for male or Schülerin for female. This means student. Use it in Der Schüler lernt Deutsch, which means the student is learning German. Pronounce it as Schüler, Schülerin. Unterricht. Once again, Unterricht. This means lesson or class. Use it in Der Unterricht beginnt 9 Uhr, which means the class starts at 9 o'clock. Pronounce it as Unterricht. Fach. Once again, Fach. This means subject. In school. Use it in Mein Lieblingsfach ist Deutsch, which means my favorite subject is German. Pronounce it as Fach, with a hard ch as in Bach. Buch. Once again, Buch. This means book. Use it in Ich lese ein Buch, which means I'm reading a book. Pronounce it as Buch. Hausaufgaben. Once again, Hausaufgaben. This means homework. Use it in Ich mache meine Hausaufgaben, which means I'm doing my homework. Pronounce it as Hausaufgaben. Klassenzimmer. Once again, Klassenzimmer. This means classroom. Use it in Das Klassenzimmer ist groß, which means the classroom is big. Pronounce it as Klassenzimmer. Schreiben. Once again, schreiben. This means to write. Use it in Ich schreibe einen Brief, which means I'm writing a letter. Pronounce it as schreiben. Lesen. Once again, lesen. This means to read. Use it in Ich lese gern, which means I like to read. Pronounce it as lesen. Fragen. Once again, fragen. This means to ask. Use it in Ich möchte etwas fragen, which means I want to ask something. Pronounce it as fragen. Antworten. Once again, antworten. This means to answer. Use it in bitte antworten Sie, which means please answer. Pronounce it as antworten. Könnte ich. Once again, könnte ich. This means could I. Use it in könnte ich bitte Wasser haben, which means could I have some water, please? Pronounce it as könnte ich. Darf ich. Once again, darf ich. This means may I. Use it in darf ich reinkommen, which means may I come in? Pronounce it as darf ich. Verstehen. Once again, verstehen. This means to understand. Use it in ich verstehe nicht, which means I don't understand. Pronounce it as verstehen. Guten Tag. Once again, guten Tag. This means good day. Use it in any formal daytime greeting. Pronounce it as guten Tag. Büro. Once again, Büro. This means office. Use it in ich arbeite im Büro, which means I work in the office. Pronounce it as Büro. Arbeiten. Once again, arbeiten. This means to work. Use it in ich arbeite viel, which means I work a lot. Pronounce it as arbeiten. Kollege, Kollegin. Once again, Kollege for male, Kollegin for female. This means colleague. Use it in mein Kollege ist sehr nett, which means my colleague is very nice. Pronounce it as Kollege, Kollegin. Projekt. Once again, project. This means project. Use it in das Projekt ist interessant, which means the project is interesting. Pronounce it as Projekt. Aufgabe. Once again, Aufgabe. This means task. Use it in ich habe eine Aufgabe, which means I have a task. Pronounce it as Aufgabe. Telefon. Once again, Telefon. This means phone. Use it in das Telefon klingelt, which means the phone is ringing. Pronounce it as Telefon. Besprechung. Once again, Besprechung. This means meeting or discussion. Use it in ich bin in einer Besprechung, which means I'm in a meeting. Pronounce it as Besprechung. Zeit. Once again, Zeit. This means time. Use it in ich habe keine Zeit, which means I don't have time. Pronounce it as Zeit. Woche. Once again, Woche. This means week. Use it in die Woche war stressig, which means the week was stressful. Pronounce it as WEE. Hören. Once again, hören. This means to hear. Use it in ich kann dich nicht hören, which means I can't hear you. Pronounce it as hören. Sehen. Once again, sehen. This means to see. Use it in ich kann den Film sehen, which means I can see the movie. Pronounce it as sehen. Essen. Once again, essen. This means to eat. Use it in wir essen zusammen, which means we eat together. Pronounce it as essen. Trinken. Once again, trinken. This means to drink. Use it in ich möchte Wasser trinken, which means I want to drink water. Pronounce it as trinken. Arbeiten. Once again, arbeiten. This means to work. Use it in ich arbeite viel, which means I work a lot. Pronounce it as arbeiten. Laufen. Once again, laufen. This means to walk or to run. Use it in wir laufen im Park, which means we walk in the park. Pronounce it as laufen. Fahren. Once again, fahren. This means to drive or to go by vehicle. Use it in wir fahren nach Hause, which means we are driving home. Pronounce it as fahren. Schlafen. Once again, schlafen. This means to sleep. Use it in ich möchte schlafen, which means I want to sleep. Pronounce it as schlafen. Tragen. Once again, tragen. This means to carry. Use it in sie trägt einen Rucksack, which means she is carrying a backpack. Pronounce it as tragen. Helfen. Once again, helfen. This means to help. Use it in kannst du mir helfen, which means can you help me? Pronounce it as helfen. Zeigen. Once again, zeigen. This means to show. Use it in kannst du mir das zeigen, which means can you show me that? Pronounce it as zeigen. Lernen. Once again, lernen. This means to learn. Use it in ich lerne Deutsch, which means I am learning German. Pronounce it as lernen. And that's a wrap. You've just added some solid German words to your arsenal. How does it feel? Probably like you can impress someone at a cafe now. Make sure to practice them out loud. Maybe even try them out on a friend, and don't worry if you mess up. That's part of the fun. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Or drop a comment below with your favorite German word. I'm curious to know. And if you're looking for more ways to make learning German fun and easy, check out Airlearn. It's got some cool features that make learning feel less like a chore and more like a game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tschüss.